My dad's slap stung more than my cheek. The force of it rattled my skull, blurring my vision with a momentary whiteout. For a disorienting second, the meticulously straight lines of my condo seemed to warp and list. He didn't yell, didn't offer a single word of warning. Just the sudden, brutal impact, the instant the word no escaped my lips. A word he'd never anticipated hearing from me, his ever-compliant daughter. This all unfolded in the aftermath of my parents' bombshell, selling their family home, gifting my brother a lavish $950,000 residence, and then showing up unannounced at my doorstep, suitcases in tow, ready to claim a piece of my life too. Everyone fixates on the slap, branding it as the catastrophic moment of destruction, but the truth runs deeper. That slap was merely the sensational headline, masking a far more complex story. My name is Natasha Bennett, and for the vast majority of my 30 years, I'd honed the art of survival through quietude. Not invisibility, mind you, but a deliberate lowering of my volume, a conscious retreat from the spotlight perpetually hogged by others. My brother Daniel was a master of this spotlight stealing, a force of nature who didn't simply enter a room. He commandeered it, rearranging the very atmosphere to suit his needs. My parents predictably adored this about him. They'd always proclaimed him destined for greatness, while I was steady, dependable Natasha, the one who never needed anything. Perhaps that's why, by 30, I'd meticulously constructed a life founded on unwavering order and strict discipline. My Fort Wayne condo was my sanctuary, a refuge of clean lines, soothing warm lighting, and bookshelves meticulously organized by color and height. After a draining day of dissecting numbers for demanding clients, I craved the solace of silence. Silence was logical, predictable, trustworthy. Silence never lied. The night everything irrevocably changed, autumn had already begun its slow descent. A subtle crispness hung in the air, carrying the evocative sense of burning leaves and impending change. I just brewed a steaming mug of coffee and kicked off my heels when the doorbell shattered the evening stillness with 3 quick, frantic chimes. No one rings like that unless it's a genuine emergency or a colossal mistake. I opened the door to find my parents standing there, each burdened with 2 overstuffed suitcases, looking like hapless travelers stranded after a missed flight. My mother's eyes were unnaturally wide and glistening with unshed tears. My father's jaw was clenched so tightly I could see the muscles twitch. "We lost the house," Mom whispered, pulling me into a hug that felt strangely hollow, rehearsed. "Bad investments. We have nowhere to go." I instinctively stepped aside, because what else does one do when their parents suddenly declare themselves homeless? I reluctantly made space for their cumbersome suitcases, offering them a temporary haven for a few days, though the long, relieved exhale that escaped my father's lips sent a shiver of unease down my spine. Mom immediately busied herself in my kitchen, rummaging through my carefully organized cabinets as if she'd lived there for decades. "You need better spices," she murmured, rearranging everything I'd meticulously placed. Dad, meanwhile, had already commandeered my couch, remote in hand, mindlessly flipping through channels as if he were in his own living room. "Did you talk to a lawyer?" I asked gently, trying to maintain a semblance of calm. "Or the bank? Anyone?" Mom's practiced smile faltered, freezing momentarily. "Sweetheart, it's complicated." "Complicated how?" Dad pointedly avoided my gaze. "We're figuring it out." I recognized that carefully neutral tone, the one they employed whenever the truth proved inconvenient. Still, I desperately wanted to believe them, to quell the rising tide of unease churning in my chest as they skillfully dodged every direct question about what had actually transpired. But then came the insidious little things. Mom strategically placing her collection of skincare products in my bathroom, Dad meticulously tightening the screws on a cabinet hinge as if settling in for an extensive renovation project, the casual way they used "we" when referring to my condo, the saccharine smile Mom gave me as she cooed, "It already feels like home." And the thing about silence, the very thing I loved most about it, is that it amplifies every discordant note. Something was undeniably off, and I could feel the suppressed truth pressing against the carefully curated walls of my condo, desperately clawing its way to the surface. By the 3rd morning, the cloying scent of my mother's pancakes permeated my kitchen like an inescapable fog. She hummed softly, too softly, while meticulously flipping them in my skillet, attempting to conjure a nostalgic illusion of my childhood home. Dad sat at the counter, glued to his phone, offering unsolicited commentary on the morning news as if this were his established daily ritual in his own domain. I watched them in silence, my coffee growing tepid in my hands. "Have you two started looking at rentals?" I finally asked, breaking the strained tableau. "Or talked to anyone about next steps?" Mom froze, just imperceptibly but enough for me to notice. "It's only been a few days, honey. Give us time." Dad didn't even bother to look up. "You're rushing things. Rushing." They had arrived with 4 suitcases and precisely 0 explanations. I stirred my coffee, fighting to keep my voice level. "I'm not rushing, I'm asking." Dad finally met my gaze, briefly, sharply, before quickly averting his eyes. "Drop it for now." That fleeting flicker in his expression sent a chilling premonition through me. They weren't merely confused or overwhelmed. They were deliberately stalling. That afternoon, I sought refuge on my balcony and dialed Adrian Cole. We'd been college classmates. Now, he was a respected lawyer in the city. If anyone could navigate the fog of obfuscation my parents were generating, it was him. "I need you to check something," I said, my voice tight. "My parents claim they lost their house." His voice immediately softened with concern. "Natasha, are you okay?" "Not really, just see what you can find." He promised he would. When I returned inside, Mom was reorganizing my pantry yet again, meticulously stacking cans into unnervingly neat pyramids. Dad had completely taken over my sofa, shoes off, remote in hand, now muttering about fixing the loose hinge on my hallway door. As if he planned to be a permanent fixture in my life. "Dad," I said, struggling to maintain composure. "That door is fine." "Needs a man's touch," he retorted dismissively. My grip tightened around my phone, knuckles white. That night, I lay awake, staring blankly at the ceiling, acutely aware of the unfamiliar sounds of 2 extra people breathing in my meticulously ordered condo. Every instinct screamed that I was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. The following day, Adrian called. His somber tone conveyed everything even before he spoke the words. "Natasha, your parents didn't lose their house." My heart plummeted. "What do you mean? They didn't lose it? I mean, they sold it voluntarily?" "I'm afraid so." I pressed a trembling hand to my chest, struggling to breathe. "Sold? Why?" "There was a cash transfer. The buyer wired the full amount, $950,000, directly into an account linked to a property registered under Daniel's name." I stared at the metal railing of my balcony, the cool metal suddenly biting against my skin. "My parents sold their house and bought my brother a $950,000 home." "I'm afraid so." Silence stretched between us, broken only by the ragged sound of my own breathing. Adrian continued, his voice laced with sympathy. "They didn't lose anything, Natasha. They made a choice. And now they're at your place because they don't have one anymore." I closed my eyes, reeling. The truth slammed into me with such force that it stole the air from my lungs. Of course. Daniel, the perennial golden child, needed yet another boost. So they'd handed him their entire life savings. Not a loan, not a discussion, but a house, practically $1 million. And then they had the audacity to show up at my door, peddling a fabricated tale about bad investments, fully expecting me to shoulder the burden of their impulsive decision. I walked back inside, feeling like a stranger in my own home. Mom was perched at the kitchen table, meticulously organizing what appeared to be her extensive skincare collection. Dad had completely disassembled my hallway door, a screwdriver clutched firmly in his hand. They looked comfortable, far too comfortable, as if this were now their rightful domain. "Natasha?" Mom asked, smiling sweetly. "You okay?" I stared at them, really stared, finally seeing the calculated truth lurking beneath every carefully constructed lie. They hadn't come here because they needed me. They'd come here because they expected me to be their fail-safe, their reliable safety net, their conveniently located second home. Something within me shifted, slowly, deliberately, irrevocably. And in that pivotal moment, I knew the confrontation was no longer optional. It was inevitable, and it was going to be excruciatingly painful. The confrontation began long before the physical blow. It started with a single, quiet, sharp sentence spoken across my own kitchen counter the following morning. "You two need to start looking for another place." I delivered the words gently at first, almost apologetically, as if I somehow owed them softness after everything they'd done. Mom blinked at me, her expression unreadable above her coffee mug. Dad froze mid-fiddle with the troublesome cabinet hinge. "What do you mean?" Mom asked, her voice unusually small. I mean, you can't stay here long term. You sold your house. You made a choice. This can't be your backup plan. The ensuing silence wasn't confusion, it was a carefully erected defense. Mom's face tightened, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. Dad's shoulders visibly hardened. "Where are your parents supposed to go?" Mom whispered, her voice laced with wounded innocence. "Where else are we supposed to go?" Dad added, echoing her sentiment. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said, my voice steady this time, devoid of apology. "I'm setting a boundary." Dad turned to face me fully, the screwdriver still clutched in his hand. A silent threat. "We gave your brother a home because he needed help. You're fine. You've always been fine." There it was, the raw, unfiltered truth, laid bare like a damning accusation. My independence, my hard-earned self-sufficiency, wasn't a source of pride for them. It was simply a convenient excuse to exploit me. I refused to raise my voice, though every fiber of my being screamed in protest. "You lied to me. You said you lost everything. You didn't. You handed everything to Daniel. So no, you can't stay here." Mom's eyes widened dramatically, tears welling up instantly, as if she could somehow manipulate her way out of reality. "Natasha, sweetheart." But the familiar sting of guilt didn't land this time. I had carried it for years, a heavy weight pressing against my ribs, but now it simply slid off, leaving me strangely unburdened. Dad stood up slowly, his face contorted with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "We're not leaving." "You are," I replied, my voice unwavering. "Today or tonight, but you're leaving." The room seemed to shrink, the air growing heavy and charged with unspoken tension. I felt something fundamental shift within the house, a long dormant boundary snapping back into place after years of being deliberately ignored. Dad took a step closer, his eyes blazing. "Say that again." "No," I said simply, meeting his gaze unflinchingly. "You need to leave." And that was when he snapped. No build-up, no escalating argument, just a sudden, brutal crack across my face. My vision exploded in a blinding flash of white. The room tilted violently. My skin burned under the searing imprint of his palm. For a fleeting second he froze, as if even he hadn't anticipated his own violent outburst. Mom gasped audibly, but she didn't move toward me, didn't offer a word of comfort. She remained frozen in place, a silent accomplice. The initial shock didn't register first. It was the clarity that hit me with the force of a physical blow. Because in that instant, I knew that if I didn't put an end to this insidious pattern immediately, it would only deepen, only spread, only metastasize into something far uglier than we could ever possibly recover from. I straightened slowly, pressing my hand to my throbbing cheek. "Get out of my house." Dad's voice dropped to a dangerous growl. "You don't talk to me like that." I didn't respond. I walked purposefully to the kitchen counter, picked up my phone, and dialed 3 digits. "Natasha," Mom gasped, her voice laced with panic. "Don't do this." "He hit me?" I said, my voice steady, still staring directly at Dad. "In my own home." When the dispatcher answered, my voice didn't tremble. "Yes, I need officers at my address. I have 2 people refusing to leave my property." Dad's jaw twitched uncontrollably, but he didn't advance toward me again. Mom began to cry loudly, desperately, but even her sobs felt contrived. Another manipulative performance designed to shift the blame back onto me. Mr. Crawford, my kind-hearted neighbor, knocked hesitantly on the open door. "Is everything okay?" "No," I said, meeting his concerned gaze. "But it will be." The arrival of the police officers instantly transformed the atmosphere of the room. Dad attempted to argue his case, but he had no legal standing. Mom desperately pleaded with the officers, wiping away her theatrical tears and insisting that they were the real victims in this absurd situation. But the officers' attention remained solely on me. "Do you want them removed from the property?" "Yes," I said, my voice clear and resolute. "I do." Minutes later, they were begrudgingly gathering their suitcases, the same suitcases they had dragged into my life, filled with fabricated stories and carefully constructed half-truths. And as they walked out of my condo, escorted by law enforcement, something profound and transformative clicked into place within me. This wasn't a collapse, a devastating failure. This was the beginning. My beginning. The night my parents were escorted out of my condo didn't resolve anything. It simply shifted the battleground. In the days that followed, the silence in my home felt different, cleaner, safer. imbued with a sense of hard-won peace. But underneath the newfound tranquility, something else pulsed. A low hum of anticipation. The undeniable knowledge that Daniel, my parents, and the tangled web of choices they had made were all on the verge of unraveling. 3 days after the incident, I received the first call from Marissa, Daniel's girlfriend. Her voice was tight, bordering on frantic. "Natasha, are your parents with you?" "No." A shaky breath escaped her lips. "He can't do this. He can't just shut down like this." "Marissa, what's happening?" But before she could elaborate, the call abruptly disconnected. I didn't hear from anyone again until 2 weeks later when my grandmother, Evelyn, called. Her voice was characteristically steady, but I could detect the gathering storm beneath the surface. "You need to come over," she said, her tone brooking no argument. "It's time you heard what's going on." When I arrived, she led me into her sun-drenched kitchen, where the warm light streamed across the worn wooden table. Rolled-up newspapers sat ominously next to her well-used coffee mug. "Your parents have been staying here." I blinked, momentarily stunned. "Here? With you?" "They showed up the night after you called the police. Told me they needed a place to think." I exhaled sharply, the air rushing from my lungs. "And what have they been doing? Thinking?" Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. "No, they've been arguing with each other, with Daniel, with themselves. They're unraveling, Natasha." I sank heavily into a chair, my legs suddenly weak. "Why?" She slid one of the newspapers across the table toward me. The glaring headline made my stomach clench with a familiar, sickening dread. "Local man faces foreclosure." Daniel's name wasn't explicitly mentioned, but the surrounding details were unmistakable. The property value, the precise location, the damning timeline. "He mortgaged the house," Evelyn said quietly, her voice filled with quiet sorrow. "The one your parents bought him." I felt the air constrict around me, suffocating me. "Mortgaged? How much?" "Almost all of it." My breath hitched in my throat. "And the investment is gone," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Lost in a month. Fast, reckless, poor decisions all around." Of course it was. Of course Daniel, for all his carefully cultivated charm and unwavering confidence, had gambled their entire lives on a flimsy dream he barely comprehended. Evelyn reached across the table, her weathered hand covering mine. "Your parents believed they were helping him, but they never truly grasped the depth of the hole he was digging. They're facing the consequences now." I swallowed hard, struggling to maintain composure. "What do they want from me?" "You," she said, her gaze unwavering, "are the only stable one. They want you to fix it." Those words hit me harder than they should have, because that was always the point, wasn't it? I'd been their reliable safety net since the day I turned 18, and they genuinely believed they could always fall back on me again, regardless of how deeply they cut me first. Before I could formulate a response, a car door slammed shut outside, shattering the tense silence. Evelyn's gaze shifted towards the window. "That'll be them." Mom walked in first, her eyes red and swollen, but her posture rigid and unyielding. Dad followed close behind, his shoulders slumped forward in defeat, a stark contrast to the overbearing man who had slapped me weeks earlier. And then Daniel stepped inside last, pale, exhausted, utterly defeated. The four of them stood awkwardly in the doorway, a tableau of utter collapse. Evelyn cleared her throat, breaking the strained silence. "Sit." We all reluctantly complied. Mom's voice trembled, barely audible. "Natasha, we didn't come here to fight." Dad stared fixedly at the worn surface of the table, refusing to meet my gaze. "We want to explain." Daniel couldn't bring himself to look at me at all. I folded my hands tightly in my lap, attempting to project an outward calm I didn't feel. "Then explain." Mom began haltingly, her voice thick with unshed tears. "We sold the house because Daniel's startup needed a push. And the house, we bought him. We thought it was an investment in his future." "An investment you didn't even bother to tell me about," I interjected, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Dad winced visibly, as if struck by a physical blow. "We didn't think you'd understand." That single sentence burned with the searing intensity of a branding iron. I'd heard it my entire life. "Didn't think I'd understand," I repeated softly, the words laced with sarcasm. "Or didn't think I mattered." Dad opened his mouth to protest, then quickly snapped it shut again, apparently realizing that any attempt at justification would only exacerbate the situation. Mom wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her face a mask of misery. Daniel finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "I messed up," he confessed, his shoulders slumping even further. "I thought I had a good idea. I thought I could turn it into something that would make you all proud." "At what cost?" I asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. He didn't answer, couldn't answer. He didn't need to. The foreclosure notice, the failed investments, the crushing weight of the mortgage, everything spelled out the devastating cost in stark, undeniable terms. Dad leaned forward, his expression pleading. "We know we hurt you. What happened in your condo? It should never have happened." I stared directly at him, unflinching. "You hit me." His face crumpled, his carefully constructed facade of composure finally collapsing. "I know." The words were scraped out of him, as if they caused him physical pain. I was angry, embarrassed, losing everything. It made me someone I shouldn't be. Mom reached hesitantly for my hand, stopping halfway as if unsure of whether she was even entitled to such a gesture. "We didn't come here to ask you to fix anything," she said, her voice shaking. "We came because Evelyn told us the truth." "What truth?" "That you don't owe us your home," she said quietly, her gaze locking with mine. "Or your life, or your forgiveness." The room went completely silent, the air thick with unspoken emotion. Even the house itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Evelyn spoke then, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the tension like a sharp knife. "Family can make mistakes, big ones. But healing doesn't begin with fixing the numbers. It begins with owning the damage." Daniel nodded slowly, tears finally spilling down his cheeks. "I'm trying. I'm looking for work. I'll pay back what I can," Mom whispered, her voice filled with a fragile hope. "We want to make things right, Natasha, but we'll do it without sinking you again." Dad swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "If you let us, we'd like to earn your forgiveness, not demand it." The anger that had been simmering inside me for so long slowly began to loosen its grip. Not disappeared, not forgotten, but loosened enough to allow me to breathe again. "I can't fix your choices," I said, my voice devoid of emotion, "and I won't carry them anymore. But I'm willing to talk." Slowly, carefully, Mom broke into sobs. Not desperate, not manipulative this time, but filled with genuine relief. Dad nodded once, deeply, his eyes filled with remorse. Daniel finally looked up, gratitude written all over his tired face. Evelyn smiled softly, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Good. Then this is the real beginning." And it was. Not the beginning of forgetting the past, but the beginning of understanding just how much we had to rebuild separately first. Before, maybe, someday, attempting to rebuild together. In the weeks that followed, everything moved slowly, tentatively, the way new healing always does. My parents stayed with Evelyn, not as helpless victims seeking rescue, but as two flawed individuals learning to live with the consequences of their own ill-considered choices. She didn't coddle them or enable their self-pity. She guided them with firm words, gentle reminders, and the kind of brutally honest conversations they deliberately avoided for years. Daniel found a job, a humble, steady position far removed from the grandiose visions he once boasted about. But he showed up every day, worked diligently, and paid his dues. He called me once a week, not to beg for financial assistance, but to update me on his progress and to offer his apologies in small, genuine ways. As for me, my condo felt different now, lighter, more grounded. I added a new deadbolt to the front door, rearranged a few pieces of furniture, not out of fear or paranoia, but out of a conscious act of reclaiming my space, my sanctuary. Adrian checked in often, reminding me that boundaries weren't impenetrable walls, but doors that I had the power to control. One quiet Saturday afternoon, I paid a visit to Evelyn. My parents were outside in the yard, diligently raking leaves side by side, working in comfortable silence. They both looked up when they saw me arrive, their faces etched with a cautious blend of hope and apprehension. Not guilty, not demanding, just hopeful. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something other than anger. I felt possibility. We're not a perfect family now. Maybe we never were. But we're finally an honest one. I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean erasing the past, pretending that the pain never existed. It means refusing to carry the weight of someone else's mistakes on your own back, choosing to release the burden and move forward. My home is mine again, truly mine. My peace is mine again, fiercely guarded and carefully nurtured. In the future, well, we're rebuilding it one deliberate step at a time. If any part of my story resonates with you, I encourage you to share your own experiences in the comments below. And please subscribe for more stories like this.